Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to continue on with chapter 1 of Inside Scientology. This is talking about L. Ron Hubbard, so stay tuned and find out what we're talking about today. Alright guys, so we're continuing chapter 1. This is going to be part 3 of this chapter so far. And at this point in time, it's in the 1940s, and Hubbard is in Pasadena, California. He's on leave from the Navy. He did not return to his family. He is living with Jack Parsons at the parsonage, and he is learning tenets of Aleister Crowley's religion. During this time, he is also talking about starting his own religion, and he still is Jack Parsons' girlfriend. So let's move on with the chapter. In September, Hubbard left the parsonage and entered the Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in Oakland, California, to be treated for a recurrence of duodenal ulcer. There, Hubbard would later claim he healed himself of not just ulcers, but of war wounds that had left him crippled and blind. Crippled and blind. He was perfectly fine at the parsonage. He was perfectly fine when he got off the boat in Pasadena. So where the hell was he crippled and blind from? He also, according to his later statements, did groundbreaking research into the workings of the human mind. No evidence of this research has ever been found in Hubbard's hospital file. Instead, his chronic ulcers gave the Navy cause to discharge him. This was not welcome news, as the Navy had provided Hubbard with steady income for the first time ever. He sent an anxious telegram to his superiors trying to downplay the seriousness of his ulcer. Quote, "Have served at sea with present symptoms much worse, without prejudice to duty, and did not leave that duty because of present diagnosis," he said, imploring to be kept on, but it was to no avail. Oh, what happened? Two months later, in December 5th of 1945, Hubbard was discharged from Oak Knoll and officially detached from the Navy. So let's talk about that for a minute, because everybody loves to talk about his naval accomplishments and things of that nature. One, the man opened fire on Mexican islands. Let's just call it as we see it. He did wrong the first time he was ever allowed to actually do anything. Then on top of that, you go on leave. You're living it up in Pasadena while your wife and child are across the country. You do not see them. Meanwhile, you're gallivanting around with all these other women. You go into a hospital where you lie and say that you've healed yourself of not only your ulcers, which is the reason why you were discharged, but you were also crippled and blind and healed yourself and did great work into the mind, which there's no research anywhere. If you look on this channel under my Anti-Scientology school playlist, where I'm going through Dianetics, there is no research anywhere backing up anything that he has ever said. But now, you go, when the Navy's like, okay, well, you have ulcers, so get the fuck out. You're like, oh no, please don't, because this is the first actual real paycheck you've ever had in your life. But then, hitching a trailer to the back of his Packard, still dressed in his Navy uniform, Hubbard drove south to Pasadena, where the next stage of his transformation awaited him. During the months that Hubbard was gone, Parsons immersed himself in the practice of magic. He was set on conjuring up a woman he would refer to as his elemental, to be his new mate, since, Hubbard stole his chick. Parsons was pleased when his friend returned to the parsonage and asked him to be his assistant during the prolonged ritual that Parsons called his magical working. Hubbard agreed, and after several weeks of their combined efforts, Parsons claimed to have summoned his elemental, who appeared at his door a week later in the form of a very attractive young redhead named Marjorie Cameron. An artist, Cameron moved into the parsonage almost immediately soon after the couple married. So things kind of worked out for Jack. He got him a chick, they got married. Great. We're not done with Jack yet. As for Hubbard, when he wasn't serving as a sorcerer's apprentice, he was holed up in his bedroom contending with what appeared to be a massive bout of writer's block, having purchased a new dictaphone, which he hoped would help speed his productivity. He'd written reassuringly to his agent that he was about to experience a flood of copy over the next few weeks. Quote, "You will have to hire squads of messengers just to get it around an armored car just to pick up checks," Hubbard said. But he spent day after day staring at a wall. Now, that would be quite an issue for someone like Hubbard, because he was known as a prolific writer. He would, write all night long, and he would churn out pages, and that was how he kept his family fed. But now he is completely silent. It was during this period that Hubbard convinced Parsons that they should go into business together. Now, this is where things start to get a little hinky between Hubbard and Parsons, with Betty as a silent third. The idea was to pool their resources in a venture called Allied Enterprises and then profit jointly off the capabilities and crafts of each of the partners. On projects yet to be determined, Parsons put up the most of the capital, investing nearly his entire savings of $21,000. Now, in 1940, $21,000 was a massive amount of money. Hell, for me right now, $21,000 is a massive amount of money. But taking the time frame, but also taking this information, Hubbard put in all of his money too, which was about $1,200. But his primary job was to come up with the ideas. So you have Parsons throwing up 21 grand, and Hubbard's over here like, oh, here's 1,200. As their first venture, Hubbard suggested that Allied Enterprises go into the yachting business. He and Betty would withdraw $10,000 from the partnership's account and go to Miami, where they would use the money to secure the boats. Then he told Parsons they would sell them back to California to be sold at a profit. Excited by the adventure of the business and confident that Hubbard's proficiency as a sailor and sea captain would stand them in good stead, Parsons readily agreed to the plan. Now, let's stop there. Jack believed Hubbard when Hubbard said that he was this amazing sailor. I mean, why wouldn't you? He was in the Navy. But, when you don't tell people that you fired on innocent islands as target practice, your first time allowed to do anything, people might actually think you're capable of what you're supposed to be able to do. But you're not. Hubbard had, meanwhile, written to the chief of the naval personnel requesting permission to leave the country in order to sail around the world collecting writing material under the patronage of Allied Enterprises. But Parsons had no knowledge of that proposal, and so it was that in April of 1946, L. Ron Hubbard left Pasadena for Miami, spiriting away both Jack Parsons' one-time mistress and his money. So Hubbard had already had other plans for what he was actually going to do, but he didn't let Jack know that. So that's one of those like 3-card Monty kind of situations. Which one's the queen? Because none of them's the queen kind of situations. But he did this with a man's money.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Parsons finally began to worry when a month went by without hearing from his business partners. Chastened after several members of his household and Aleister Crowley warned him that he had been the victim of a confidence trick, Parsons flew to Miami in June, where he found that his fears were justified. Hubbard and Sarah, she was called Betty, only at 1003 South Orange Grove, had taken out a $12,000 mortgage and purchased the two boats, two schooners, not yachts, schooners, the Harpoon and the Blue Water II, and the yacht named Diane. Now, having hired a crew with Parsons' money, they were preparing to sail away on the Harpoon quickly. Parsons secured an injunction to prevent them leaving the country, and a week later, Allied Enterprises was formally dissolved. So, here you are. You have a man who sings your praises, even though you've stolen his girlfriend, who has given you a home to live in, who has decided to go into business with you, has trusted you with everything that he has, and you still try to fuck him. Does that sound like a great person to you? No, it does not. In exchange for Parsons' agreement not to press charges, Hubbard and Sarah agreed to pay half of Parsons' legal fees and relinquish their right to the Diane and the Blue Water II. They were allowed to keep the Harpoon, which they ultimately sold, but they paid Parsons $2,900 to cover his interest in the ship. Parsons returned to Pasadena, quote, near mental and financial collapse, as he said, and soon afterwards sold 1003 South Orange Grove, and the era of the parsonage was over. So, let me take a drink. Here you have a man who has completely believed in you and completely backed all of what you've wanted to do. Even though you have stolen his girlfriend, you have fucked every woman in the damn parsonage, and you have lied to every single person there. He still believes in you and still backs you. You try to fuck him, take his money, go to Miami with his ex-girlfriend. You buy 3 boats and plan to sail away like it's no big deal. When he catches you, he still decides not to prosecute. I would have thrown your raggedy ass in jail. And you only have to pay some of his legal fees, give him some of his money back. And when you sell a boat, you only give him $2,900 out of that boat. And push him into complete, like he is, you have screwed this man up so much that he goes back to Pasadena, he sells his house, and the age of the parsonage, which was kind of an enlightened time, is over because you're a royal jackass. But there are thousands of people that follow the teachings of this royal jackass. But the era of L. Ron Hubbard had just begun. L. Sprague de Camp, Hubbard's colleague in science fiction, had attended Caltech and knew Jack Parsons. De Camp was aware of Hubbard's friendship with the scientist and also knew of his most recent escapades in Miami. De Camp, skeptical of the beginnings, saw in Hubbard's activities a familiar pattern. Sometime soon, De Camp predicted that in a letter to Isaac Amozoff, Hubbard would arrive in Los Angeles, quote, broke, working the poor, wounded veteran racket for all it's worth, and looking for another easy mark. Don't say you haven't been warned. Robert Heinlein thinks Ron went to pieces morally as a result of the war. I think that's fertilizer, that he always was that way. But when he wanted to conciliate or get something from somebody, he could put on a good charm act. What the war did was to wear him down to where he no longer bothers with the act. And I do believe that's another great look into Hubbard's actual character, because he could play these huge confidence games. He could get you to back him, and then the whole time he's fucking you over. He did that all the way. Like he was doing it in college when he did that whole, oh, we're going to go on an adventure and we're going to film it, and screwed everybody out of their money. He has done it every single step of the way, but now he doesn't even put on the act. On August 10th of 1946, L. Ron Hubbard, then 35, and Sarah Betty Northrope, 22, were married bigamously, as Hubbard had never bothered to get a divorce from Polly. They settled into a small cottage in Laguna Beach, where Hubbard, nearly penniless, tried to resume his writing career. True to DeCamp's predictions, Hubbard started filing claims with the Veterans Administration, hoping to increase his disability pension. He complained of numerous ailments, including psychological problems, and in one letter appealed to the VA to help him pay for psychiatric counseling. That's interesting, considering his entire religion is so against psychiatric treatment that they've actually had people die under their tutelage because they couldn't get the proper mental health that they needed. In that letter, dated October 15th of 1947, Hubbard complained of, quote, long periods of moroseness and, quote, suicidal inclinations, symptoms that in more recent years might suggest a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. But he'd, quote, avoided out of pride seeking help or even confiding in a physician, in the hopes that, quote, time would balance a mind which I had every reason to suppose was seriously affected by the war. But now, having tried and failed to regain his equilibrium, quote, I am utterly unable to approach anything like my own competence, he wrote. My last physician informed me that it might be very helpful if I were to be examined and perhaps treated psychologically or even by a psychoanalyst. I cannot myself afford such treatment. So he is playing up the poor veteran thing, but however small his part in the war is, you never actually know what he saw or what they were engaged in, because a lot of that stuff was just not talked about, especially during that time period. So yes, he might have a case of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but he was going to play that shit up. The Veterans Administration responded by urging Hubbard to report for a physical, and ultimately did increase his pension. But Hubbard, by all accounts, never followed through with the psychiatric counseling. Instead, he chose a more independent path, quietly writing a series of personal, quote, affirmations in his journal. It was an experiment, as he said, to reestablish the ambition, willpower, desire to survive, the talent and confidence of myself. It would also be the most revealing psychological self-assessment completed with exhortations to himself that he had ever made. So he did weasel the money out of the VA, and he did get his increase, but he never actually used that to go about what he wanted to do. In the affirmations, Hubbard confessed to deep anxiety about his writings as well as his struggles with impotence, which he blamed on steroid treatments he had received to treat his ulcers. He also acknowledged his compulsion toward lying and exaggeration. That's wonderful. I wonder if those journals are still anywhere. Despite frequent exhortations to the contrary, his war record, he admitted, was none too glorious. But he added that he must be convinced that he suffered no reaction for any disciplinary action. His service was honorable, he affirmed. So, where do Scientologists get that he's so decorated and he was such a great soldier? Straight out their ass. Well, actually straight out of L. Ron Hubbard's ass, but still, straight out the ass. There's no records to back this. So, we're going to end this here. Like I said before, These are very lengthy chapters, but we are getting a lot of good information in these chapters. What just happened? Okay, so we're getting a lot of good information in these chapters. We're getting a little bit more insight into breaking down everything that goes on with L. Ron Hubbard. So with that said, guys, I'm going to end today's video. Down in the comment section down below, let me know what you guys think of this book so far and of the information we have discussed. In the comment section down below, in the description box down below, I'll have the information for this book. It's on Kindle. That's what I'm reading it off of right now. And all of my social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, email are down below. Also, there are 5 ways to support the channel, and if you could, please do. They're Patreon, PayPal, Minds, Cash App, and Venmo. They're all listed in the description box. With that said, guys, that's going to end today's video, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.